Think and Grow Rich isn't something you just read once. It's something you become. You think you haven't had your opportunity yet. You think it's still coming. Somewhere in the future. Some perfect moment. Some perfect opportunity. Some perfect break. The phone call, the business idea, the promotion, the connection, the lucky moment that changes everything. That's what you've been waiting for. That's what most people been waiting for. And because they're waiting, they never stop to consider a dangerous possibility. What if opportunity already came? What if it already appeared? What if it already crossed your path and you didn't recognize it? Not because you weren't intelligent, not because you weren't capable, but because it didn't look the way you expected. Napoleon Hill wrote this in Think and Grow Rich. Opportunity has a sly habit of slipping in the back door, often disguised as misfortune or temporary defeat. Rewind that again if you missed it. Misfortune, temporary defeat, not success, not victory, not excitement, not certainty, misfortune, defeat. The very things most people spend their lives trying to avoid. But what if that moment was supposed to change your life? Didn't look like opportunity at all. What if it looked like a problem? What if it looked like losing your job? What if it looked like getting rejected? What if it looked like failing? What if it looked like being forced to start over? Would you recognize it? Or would you do what most people do? Would you label it as bad luck? Would you complain about it? Would you try to escape it? Think of your own life. Go back. Not a year, not 5 years. Go all the way back. Think about the moments that frustrated you most. The moments that hurt, the moments that confused you, the moments you wish never happened, the relationships that ended, the opportunities that disappeared, that business that failed, that friendship that broke apart, the dream that didn't work out. At the time, it felt like life was taking something from you, but was it? Or was life trying to move you, trying to redirect you, trying to push you toward something bigger? Because here's the strange thing about opportunity. You rarely recognize it in real time. You recognize it in hindsight, years later, after you've grown, after you've changed, after you've gained perspective. Then suddenly you see it. You can see how that rejection forced you to improve, how that failure forced you to learn, how that setback forced you to evolve. And you realize something unsettling. The thing you hated helped you build the person you became. But while it was happening, you didn't see it because you were looking for opportunity, and the opportunity was wearing a disguise. That's why this quote from Napoleon Hill is so powerful to me. It forces you to question your entire past. Because if opportunity hides itself, how many times have you walked right past it? How many times did you reject it? How many times did you call it a problem when it was actually a doorway? How many times did you quit too early? How many times did you walk away because something became uncomfortable? How many times did you say, this isn't for me, this isn't working, this is a waste of time, without realizing you were standing inches away from a breakthrough? Most people assume opportunity feels good. That's the mistake. They assume it arrives with confidence, with clarity, with excitement, with certainty. But real opportunity often carries pressure. Let me repeat that. But real opportunity often arrives carrying pressure, confusion, responsibility, risk, growth. And growth rarely feels comfortable. That's why so many people miss it. They're waiting for a blessing, and when it arrives disguised in a challenge, they reject it. They're waiting for a miracle, and when it arrives disguised as hard work, they walk away. They're waiting for a breakthrough, and when it arrives disguised as temporary defeat, they give up. Not because they're not capable, but because they misread the moment. They judge the experience by how it felt, not by what it could become. And that's a dangerous mistake, because some of the greatest opportunities of your life will arrive looking exactly like something you don't want. They'll interrupt your plans. They'll change your identity, force you to grow, force you to adapt, force you to become someone stronger, and you're not paying attention. You spend your entire life asking, when is my opportunity coming? Not realizing it already came. Maybe more than once, maybe many times. Maybe the very thing you've been complaining about was trying to help you. Maybe the setback was a setup. Maybe the obstacle was instruction. Maybe the defeat was preparation. Maybe the closed door was protection. Maybe the thing you call bad luck was actually guidance. And maybe, just maybe, the opportunity that was supposed to change your life didn't look like opportunity at all. Maybe it looked like a problem, and maybe you walked away from it. Now let's read the quote again from Napoleon in Think and Grow Rich. Opportunity has a sly habit of slipping through the back door, often disguised as misfortune or temporary defeat. Notice the word he used, sly. Sly meaning not obvious, not loud, not clear, sly. Like something intelligent, something strategic, something hiding in plain sight. Because opportunity most times doesn't knock on the front door. It slips through the back, quiet, unnoticed, uninvited, while you're busy looking somewhere else, while you're waiting for the perfect moment, while you're searching for certainty. Opportunity has already entered the room, and most people never see it because they're looking for the wrong things. They're looking for success. Opportunity doesn't look like success all the time. That's the trick. It looks like inconvenience, a schedule you didn't want, a responsibility you didn't ask for, a challenge you weren't prepared for, something that interrupts your plans, something that forces you to adapt because it feels inconvenient. You rejected it, not realizing it came carrying a gift. Opportunity looks like pressure. Pressure to perform, pressure to grow, pressure to become more than you've been. And most people hate pressure. They avoid it, complain about it, run from it. But pressure is often the first sign that something valuable is trying to emerge. A diamond is created under pressure. Strength is created under pressure. Yet, the moment pressure enters someone's life, they assume something is wrong. Opportunity smiles and quietly walks away. Opportunity looks like uncertainty. No guarantees, no roadmap, no certainty about the outcome, just a chance, a possibility, a path that requires faith. And that's where some people lose because they want proof before action. They want certainty before commitment. They want guarantees before movement. But opportunity doesn't work that way. It never has. It asks first, then reveals. It says, take the step. And most people respond, show me what's at the end first. So they stay there. They stay where they are, safe, comfortable, stuck, and opportunity moves on. Sometimes opportunity looks like failure. See, that's the disguise that almost nobody recognizes. A business collapse, a relationship ends, a plan falls apart, a door closes in your face, and the person immediately labels it failure, defeat, loss, game over. But Napoleon Hill didn't say opportunity arrives as success. He said it often arrives disguised as temporary defeat. Temporary, meaning it only looks like the end. It only feels like failure. It only appears to be a loss. Because the true purpose of the moment hasn't revealed itself yet. That's what makes this such a dangerous game. The people who win and the people who lose often see the exact same event. One person sees disaster, the other sees instruction. One person sees rejection, the other sees redirection. One person sees a dead end, the other sees a doorway. Same moment, different interpretation, different outcome. That's why opportunity is so deceptive. It doesn't test your intelligence, it tests your perception. Can you see beyond the surface? Can you see beyond the emotion? Can you see beyond the immediate discomfort? Most people can't. That's why they miss it over and over again. They're waiting for opportunity to arrive wearing a crown. or a gown, because opportunity always arrives wearing clothes. And sometimes those clothes are dingy. They're waiting for excitement. It arrives carrying responsibility. They're waiting for certainty. It arrives carrying risk. They're waiting for victory. It arrives disguised as struggle. And because the disguise is so convincing, they never realize what just happened. Years later, they look back and suddenly everything makes sense. They finally understand why the setback happened, why the rejection happened, why that failure happened. They finally see the opportunity that was hidden inside of it. But by then, the lesson has already been taught. The disguise has already been removed. And they realized something that Napoleon Hill understood decades ago. Opportunity was never hidden from them. It was testing them, testing their awareness, testing their perception, testing whether they could recognize value, whether it arrived wearing a mask of temporary defeat. And that's the trick. The trick is not the opportunity is rare. The trick is that most people don't recognize when it appears. This is where most people lose. Not because they're not talented, not because they're not intelligent, not because they're not capable. They lose because they misread the moment. Napoleon Hill warned us about this in Think and Grow Rich. He understood something most never figure out. The greatest opportunities often arrive disguised as temporary defeat. And because they arrive wearing that disguise, people reject them. Not once, not twice, their entire lives. You called it bad luck. You called it the situation and decided life was against you. You asked, why does this always happen to me? You felt cursed, unlucky, forgotten. But what if it wasn't bad luck? What if it was preparation? What if the thing frustrating you was actually developing you? You call it stress. You said, this is too much. I can't handle this. I don't need this right now. So you tried to escape it. You looked for comfort, for relief, for an easier path. But growth has never lived in comfort. Growth lives where pressure exists. Growth lives where you're forced to adapt, forced to think differently, forced to become more than you currently are. You called it, this isn't for me. And that's where most dreams die. Not in failure, in interpretation. Because the moment you tell yourself, this isn't for me, you stop looking, you stop learning, you stop growing, you stop fighting. The opportunity didn't leave, you left. That's the painful truth. But what if that was the door? The very thing you rejected, the very thing you complained about, the very thing you wanted to escape. What if that was the entrance? What if the challenge wasn't blocking the path, but creating it? What if the obstacle wasn't the enemy, but the invitation? Because that's how opportunity operates. It rarely asks permission. It rarely makes sense immediately. It simply appears, then waits to see what you'll do. Most people fail the test, not because it's difficult, because it's uncomfortable. And discomfort scares them. Pressure scares them. Uncertainty scares them. So they retreat back to what they know, back to what's familiar, back to what's safe. And they call that decision wisdom, when in reality, it was fear. What if that setback was a setup for a comeback? Think about how many times you look back in your life and realize, if that wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't be who I am today. The relationship that broke up, the job you lost, the business that failed, the opportunity that disappeared. At the time, it felt like life was taking something away, like it was over. Years later, you realize it was giving you something: perspective, strength, discipline, direction. The setback wasn't the story. The setback was the beginning of the new story. You didn't fail, you misread the moment. That's the difference. Failure is not always losing. Sometimes failure is misunderstanding. Sometimes failure is walking away too soon. Sometimes failure is labeling something as negative before you've given it time to reveal its purpose. Most people aren't defeated by circumstances. They're defeated by interpretation. They decide what something means too quickly. Pressure means danger. Difficulty means stop. Uncertainty means wrong direction. And because they believe those lies, they never discover what's on the other side. Every level of growth requires a version of you to die. The comfortable version, the predictable version, the version that wants guarantees, the version that wants certainty when there's nothing certain about life but death. The version that runs when things get difficult. That's why opportunity only feels uncomfortable, or often feels uncomfortable, because it's trying to replace who you've been with who you need to become. But transformation never feels uncomfortable. It feels disruptive. It feels inconvenient. It feels unfair. Until you understand what it's doing. Then everything changes. Then the pressure makes sense. Then the challenge makes sense. Then the struggle makes sense. Then temporary defeat makes sense. Because now you can see what it was building. But most people never get that far. They quit before construction. They leave before the lesson is complete. They run before the transformation is finished. And every time you run from pressure, you just might be running from your next level. Every time you avoid discomfort, you might be avoiding growth. Every time you retreat from uncertainty, you might be retreating from opportunity. And that's why most people stay exactly where they are. Not because opportunity never came, but because they rejected it when it arrived wearing the wrong clothes. They saw temporary defeat and never looked deeper. They saw pressure and called it punishment. They saw discomfort and called it failure. But the people who win, they understand something different. They understand that sometimes the thing that feels like it's breaking you is actually building you. So what do you do with this? What do you do now that you know what Napoleon Hill was trying to teach us in Think and Grow Rich? You stop looking at the struggle the way everybody else does, because the event isn't what determines your future. Your interpretation does. Two people can experience the exact same setback. One becomes bitter, the other becomes better. One sees a dead end, the other sees a new direction. One quits, the other grows. The circumstance was identical. The perception was different. A perception changes everything. So next time it gets hard, pause. Don't react immediately. Don't label the moment. Don't decide too quickly what it means. Because that's what you've always done. And that's what most people do. Something goes wrong, and they instantly assume it's against them. But what if it was for you? What if the challenge arrived carrying a lesson? What if the pressure arrived carrying preparation? What if the setback arrived carrying direction? Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Asking something better, asking something more powerful. Ask this, what is this trying to give me? That question changes everything, because now you're no longer a victim to the moment. Now you're a student of it. Now you're searching for value instead of searching for escape. Now you're looking deeper, because opportunity doesn't always feel good. In fact, most of the time, it doesn't. The gym doesn't feel good. Discipline doesn't feel good. Growth doesn't feel good. Responsibility doesn't feel good. Pressure doesn't feel good. But the things that transform you rarely do. That's why so many people miss opportunity. They're using comfort as a compass. And comfort always points backwards. Back towards the familiar. Back towards the safe. Back towards the life you've already outgrown. But winners learn a different skill. They learn to look beyond the feeling, beyond the emotion, beyond the temporary discomfort. And they ask, what is this trying to teach me? Because every challenge leaves something behind. Every setback leaves something behind. Every temporary defeat leaves something behind. Slow down. Listen carefully. A lesson, maybe the lesson is patience. Maybe it's discipline. Maybe it's humility. Maybe it's awareness. Maybe it's showing you exactly what you need to change. A skill. Maybe it's communication. Maybe it's a leadership. Maybe it's resilience. Maybe it's focus. Maybe the challenge exists because there's a skill you haven't developed yet. And life is forcing you to develop it. A direction. Sometimes opportunity doesn't open a door, sometimes it closes one. Sometimes the direction comes from rejection. Sometimes the direction comes from a loss. Sometimes the direction comes from discovering what's meant for you or what isn't meant for you. But direction is still a gift, even when it arrives disguised as disappointment. That's why winners see things differently. They don't expect life to be easy. They expect life to teach. They don't expect every moment to feel good. They expect every moment to have value. They understand that every experience is either advancing them or educating them. Either way, they win. That's the shift. That's the awakening. The moment you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this trying to give me? You become harder to defeat because now every setback has value. Every challenge has value. Every obstacle has value. Every temporary defeat has value. Now nothing is wasted, nothing. Because even when you don't get what you wanted, you gain something you needed. And over time, those lessons become wisdom. Those skills become strength. Those directions become destiny. That's why people who eventually win aren't always the smartest. They aren't always the most talented. They aren't always the luckiest. They're simply the people who learn how to see opportunity when others see problems, to see growth when others see pain, to see possibility when others see defeat. And because they see differently, they move differently. And because they move differently, they live differently. And because they live differently, they win differently. The difference between winners and everybody else is they don't miss when it shows up in disguise. If you want to become him, check out our daily devotional, link in the description or pin comment. Like and subscribe if you like the vibe, share if you care. Thinkers are us.